Hey guys, tonight we're going to ease back into a world that has finally decided to stop wandering. A world where movement slows not because humans have solved life, but because they've found a place that feels good enough to stay. So if you're listening from bed, or a long bus ride, or just staring at the ceiling wondering why your brain won't shut up, let your shoulders drop a little, unclench your jaw, stop trying to follow every sentence perfectly, because nothing urgent is coming your way. No battles are about to break out. No heroes are going to rise. No empires will be named. Just humans, quietly, almost accidentally, figuring out how to live next to each other without ruining everything, which, considering our track record, is already impressive. By this point in human history, settlements no longer behave like temporary guests on the land. They stop apologizing for their presence. Fires burn in the same places night after night, not because anyone declared them permanent, but because moving them would feel wrong. Paths form not through planning or design, but because enough feet kept choosing the same line through the dirt until the ground gave up and accepted it. People know where things are now. They know where the water is, where the elders sit, where arguments usually happen, where children are allowed to run, and where they are quietly discouraged from doing so. They know where they belong, and that sense of familiarity, that dangerous, comforting familiarity, is what allows everything else to start expanding. Expansion never happens because someone wakes up one morning and says, "Let's build a civilization." Humans don't think like that. Expansion happens because someone builds a hut a little too close to another hut, and nobody complains. Then another family does the same. Then the space between homes starts to feel awkward, like a pause in a conversation that's gone on too long. Empty space begins to feel suspicious, like it's wasting potential, like it's inviting something unwanted to happen there. Humans hate unused space almost as much as they hate uncertainty, so they fill it, slowly, practically, without ever calling it growth. As settlements grow, they don't sprawl wildly outward. They thicken. More people press closer together, sharing water sources, sharing paths, sharing the constant low-level awareness of one another's existence. Children grow up recognizing faces outside their immediate family. Adults learn the rhythms of neighbors they didn't choose and can't avoid. They know who wakes early, who stays up late, who argues loudly, who pretends not to hear. Leadership, already subtle and inherited, now exists under more eyes, more memories, more quiet judgments, which leaders dislike but also depend on, because authority at this stage isn't enforced. It's observed. What changes most during this phase isn't architecture, or tools, or even food. It's psychology. People stop thinking only in terms of my family or my shelter, and begin thinking in terms of our place. And once that shift happens, behavior becomes less flexible and more opinionated. Everyone develops a sense of how things are supposed to be done here, how disputes are handled, how food is shared, how loud is too loud, how late is too late, and they notice immediately when someone does it differently. Trade increases quietly, without ceremony or announcement. Not caravans or markets yet, just small, predictable exchanges that slowly become expected. One settlement makes better tools. Another stores food more reliably. People remember who trades fairly, who delays, who cheats just enough to be annoying but not enough to confront. Reputation becomes portable. You don't just have a name anymore. You have a reputation that arrives before you do and lingers after you leave. Leaders begin walking more, not pacing nervously, but circulating, passing through spaces, watching interactions that pretend not to notice them. They listen more than they speak. They intervene only when absolutely necessary. Authority now comes from being seen noticing things. A leader who reacts too quickly seems unstable. A leader who waits, watches, and then speaks once, slowly, is trusted. Silence still does most of the work. Religion adapts, as it always does, to whatever humans are currently anxious about. And right now that anxiety is boundaries. Whose land is whose? Which rituals belong to which group? Where one settlement ends and another begins. Shared ceremonies start appearing, not because people suddenly love cooperation, but because shared rituals reduce friction. If everyone agrees the gods are watching, it saves a lot of uncomfortable conversations. Children born into these expanding settlements never experience true isolation. They grow up surrounded by layers of authority, expectation, and quiet judgment. They learn early when to speak and when to stay still. And mostly, they learn to stay still. Observation remains the safest skill a human can develop. Talking is optional. Watching is survival. Silence in these settlements isn't empty. It's dense. When do adults stop talking? Everyone nearby feels it. Pauses carry weight. A conversation that ends too early feels suspicious. One that goes on too long feels dangerous. People become experts in sensing the exact moment when enough has been said, and they stop there. As settlements interact more often, memory stretches outward. Someone's mistake in one place is remembered in another, not officially, not publicly, just quietly known. Humans don't need formal communication networks to spread information. They just need time and repetition. Gossip isn't entertainment yet. It's infrastructure. Night feels different now. Fires are closer together. Sounds overlap. Someone is always awake somewhere, coughing, shifting, murmuring, watching. That creates a strange mix of security and unease. You are not alone anymore, and you never will be again. People fall asleep knowing tomorrow will look mostly like today. That predictability is comforting. It's also dangerous, but they don't know that yet. For now, permanence feels like victory. Expansion feels like success. Interaction feels like progress. And as humans drift into sleep beneath these familiar sounds, footsteps, fire, distant voices, they carry a quiet understanding with them. Life is no longer about surviving nature alone. It's about surviving each other calmly politely, and preferably without saying too much. And next time, we'll drift further into what happens when these expanding settlements begin to feel less like homes and more like systems, when routine hardens into expectation, and expectation quietly turns into control. By the time settlements reach this stage, something subtle but irreversible has happened, and no one pauses to announce it. Because humans almost never notice structural change while it's happening. Life begins to feel organized even when nobody can explain why. People wake up, move through familiar paths, interact with familiar faces, and follow expectations that feel natural rather than imposed. That's the dangerous part. When order feels natural, it stops being questioned. And this is the moment when settlements stop being collections of families and start behaving like systems. Nobody invents the system. It emerges like dust settling. Certain people are expected to do certain things. Certain mistakes are forgiven. Others are not. Certain voices carry weight even when they're quiet. Others talk more and are somehow heard less. Of course they are. Humans have always been very good at ranking one another without writing anything down. At this point, leadership no longer needs to move constantly to be visible. Its presence is assumed. People know where decisions come from even when no decision is openly made. If someone oversteps, the correction is subtle. A look, a pause, a delayed response. Social pressure replaces confrontation because confrontation is inefficient and uncomfortable, and humans will always choose the quiet method when available. Work becomes predictable, not exciting, not oppressive, just expected. Some people handle tools. Some people handle food. Some people handle disputes. Children grow up watching this division and assume it's how the world works, because to them, it always has. Nobody tells them what their role will be. They absorb it through repetition, posture, tone, and silence. And silence is doing more work than ever. In these early proto-urban spaces, silence becomes instructional. When elders go quiet, others stop. When leaders pause, everyone waits. Speech becomes something you earn, not something you default to. Talking too much marks you as unreliable. Talking too little can mark you as dangerous. There's a sweet spot, and everyone spends their life trying not to miss it. Trade continues, but it's no longer exciting or new. It's routine. Goods move along familiar paths. People exchange items with practiced gestures. Trust is no longer personal. It's institutional, even if nobody has that word yet. You trust someone because people like them have always behaved a certain way. And if they don't, that deviation will follow them for years. Religion, unsurprisingly, adapts again. Rituals become more regular, more scheduled, less spontaneous. They mark time, authority, and belonging. You participate not because you're moved, but because that's what you do. And doing it incorrectly feels worse than not believing at all. Gods, ancestors, and stories now exist as reinforcement mechanisms. They remind people that order has always existed, which is a comforting lie humans love to tell themselves. Children born into this world never experience true improvisation. Their lives are buffered by expectation. They learn early how to stand, where to look, when to speak, and when to stay still. Observation is no longer just survival. It's etiquette. They watch adults carefully, not out of fear, but out of necessity. Because missing a cue now has social consequences that linger. Night in these settlements feels heavier, not dangerous, just dense. Fires burn. Voices murmur. Somewhere, someone is always awake. The settlement hums even while resting. People fall asleep knowing their position in the system will still be there tomorrow. That stability feels safe. It is also the beginning of something rigid, and nobody notices because rigidity feels a lot like reliability when you're tired. Humans don't drift into civilization with ambition. They drift into it because systems are quieter than chaos. And quiet, at the end of the day, is what they've been chasing all along. By this stage, no one inside these settlements would describe their lives as controlled. And that's exactly how control prefers to exist. There are no guards, no proclamations, no loud authority figures making speeches by firelight. Instead, everything runs on expectation. People wake when they're supposed to wake. They work where they're supposed to work. They interact with who they're supposed to interact with. And when they don't, the system doesn't punish them loudly. It simply withholds warmth. Conversations become shorter. Help arrives more slowly. Eye contact fades just a little. Humans are exquisitely sensitive to this kind of pressure, and they correct themselves long before anything escalates. Of course they do. Conflict is exhausting, and exhaustion is the one thing permanent settlements are trying to avoid. Leadership at this point barely needs to act. Decisions seem to make themselves. A resource is redirected. A task quietly changes hands. A person finds themselves no longer consulted. Nothing is announced. Nothing is argued. The settlement simply adjusts, like a body compensating for a limp. People tell themselves this is fairness, or tradition, or common sense. And sometimes it is. But mostly it's momentum. The system has learned what keeps it stable, and stability is now the highest moral good. Children growing up in this environment don't see hierarchy as something imposed. They see it as landscape. Just like a river flows where it flows, authority rests where it rests. They don't question it any more than they question gravity. They learn early that watching matters more than asking. Asking creates friction. Watching creates understanding. Adults reinforce this without realizing it, rewarding attentiveness and discouraging disruption. Curiosity survives, but only the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't interrupt. Trade and cooperation continue. But they're no longer personal achievements. They're expected behaviors. If someone fails at their role, it doesn't feel tragic or dramatic. It feels inconvenient. And inconvenience is quietly punished far more consistently than wrongdoing. Religion, now deeply woven into routine, stops feeling mystical and starts feeling procedural. Rituals happen because it's the correct time, the correct place, the correct gesture. Belief becomes secondary to participation. You don't need to feel anything. You just need to show up and do it right. And people do, because doing it wrong draws attention, and attention is uncomfortable. Silence, once a shared survival strategy, becomes layered with meaning. There is the silence of respect, the silence of disagreement, the silence of warning, and the most dangerous one of all, the silence that follows someone who no longer matters. Humans notice that silence immediately. They adjust. They become careful. They realign themselves with the flow of routine. Night settles over these settlements like a blanket that's been used for generations. Familiar, slightly heavy, comforting in its predictability. Fires burn. The same paths are walked. The same sounds repeat. People fall asleep knowing tomorrow will unfold in almost exactly the same way. And that sameness feels like peace. It feels like success. It feels like the world finally makes sense. And this is the moment humans unknowingly trade freedom for reliability. Not because they are forced to, but because reliability lets them rest. Systems don't arrive with chains. They arrive with schedules, habits, and the promise that nothing unexpected will happen if everyone just keeps doing what works. And humans, tired of uncertainty, accept that deal quietly, gratefully, and without asking too many questions. As time continues to move forward, something subtle but powerful begins to take hold. Something far quieter than laws or rituals, yet far more permanent. And that is memory becoming authority. Not individual memory, not stories whispered casually by elders, but shared memory, repeated memory, curated memory. The settlement starts remembering itself in very specific ways. Certain events are told again and again, always with the same emphasis, the same pauses, the same lessons carefully implied rather than spoken aloud. A past famine becomes proof that hoarding is dangerous. A past conflict becomes evidence that disagreement leads to ruin. A successful season becomes justification for doing everything exactly the same way again. Over time, these memories stop being references and start becoming rules. No one says, "You must do this because the past demands it," but everyone feels it. The past begins to lean forward, gently but insistently, guiding hands, shaping decisions before they are even consciously made. Younger generations inherit these memories as if they lived them themselves. They feel fear for disasters they never experienced, and loyalty to decisions they never agreed to. This inheritance feels natural. After all, why would the ancestors be wrong? They survived. Survival becomes the ultimate credential. Innovation, once admired, now feels suspicious. New ideas are weighed not against possibility, but against memory. Has this been tried before? Did it fail? Does it resemble something that once went wrong? Slowly, quietly, creativity narrows. Not because people are punished for thinking differently, but because thinking differently feels irresponsible. The group has a history now, and history demands respect. Leadership leans heavily on this without ever needing to say so. A suggestion can be dismissed with a simple phrase, a look, or a story about how things used to be. No argument required. Memory wins every time because memory carries emotional weight. It feels earned. Even personal identity begins to shift. People define themselves less by what they want and more by what they come from. Family roles harden. Occupations repeat across generations. A son does not become a builder because he loves building, but because builders are what his people have always been. A daughter learns her place not through force, but through example repeated so consistently it feels inevitable. Choice still exists, technically, but it feels heavy, risky, and lonely. Most people choose not to choose. Nights grow quieter in a different way now, not just peaceful, but settled. Stories told by the fire are no longer explorations of wonder or mystery. They are confirmations, reassurances that the world is understood, mapped, and already decided. Sleep comes easily in such a world. There is comfort in knowing your tomorrow will resemble yesterday. There is relief in not having to imagine alternatives. And so humans slowly step out of the present, and begin living slightly behind themselves, guided by echoes, shaped by what has already happened rather than what could still happen. This is not stagnation yet. It is something softer, almost invisible. It is tradition solidifying, and tradition, once solid, rarely asks permission before it begins steering the future. As traditions settle deeper and memory tightens its grip, silence itself begins to change meaning, no longer just the absence of speech, but a form of consent, a quiet nod that says yes without ever needing to say the word. In councils, in families, in daily routines, the one who speaks too much starts to stand out, and standing out becomes dangerous not because of punishment, but because of attention. Attention invites scrutiny, and scrutiny invites judgment. So people learn quickly that the safest position is stillness. When a decision is suggested, most do not respond with approval or objection. They simply do nothing, and that nothing is taken as agreement. Over time, this becomes understood by everyone without explanation. If you truly oppose something, you must break the silence, and breaking silence now carries weight. It signals disruption, impatience, ego. Those who speak are not immediately silenced, but they are remembered. Their names linger longer than their words. Children notice this. They watch how adults lower their eyes when elders speak. They see how pauses stretch until someone finally nods, ending discussion without resolution. They learn that survival is not about being right, but about blending into the rhythm of collective quiet. Disputes do not disappear. They simply move inward. Doubts are swallowed, questions postponed indefinitely, frustrations turned into private thoughts rather than shared concerns. This inward turn reshapes human emotion. Anger becomes softer but more persistent. Fear becomes less sharp but more constant. People feel safe yet restrained, protected yet contained. The group feels stable, but that stability is delicate, like stacked stones that rely entirely on balance rather than bonding. Leadership adapts to this perfectly. A leader no longer needs authority in the old sense. They only need to speak first and then stop. The silence that follows does the rest of the work. Decisions feel collective even when they are not. Responsibility dissolves into the group, making no one fully accountable and everyone partially responsible. This is efficient, this is peaceful, and this is powerful. But something essential begins to fade almost unnoticed. The ability to disagree without fear. The ability to explore ideas aloud. The joy of collaborative thinking. Humans still think deeply, perhaps more deeply than before, but they think alone. Minds grow rich while conversations grow poor. Nights remain calm, fires still glow, stories still repeat. But the air carries a subtle heaviness, as if something unspoken is always present, waiting. Not conflict, not rebellion, but potential. Potential that has nowhere to go because silence, once adopted as safety, is very difficult to unlearn. And so the human world moves forward smoothly, quietly, efficiently, while beneath that calm surface, unshared thoughts begin to accumulate, shaping the next transformation long before anyone dares to name it. As generations pass under this quiet system, memory slowly becomes the heaviest thing a human carries, heavier than hunger, heavier than tools, heavier even than fear, because memory now decides behavior before the body ever reacts. People do not ask what should be done in a situation. They remember what happened last time something similar occurred, and then they copy it with small adjustments. Because novelty feels risky and repetition feels safe, a child reaching for food waits, not because they were told to, but because they remember watching another child get that subtle look of disapproval weeks earlier, the kind that doesn't hurt but stays with you. Adults navigate their days almost entirely through recalled moments, past silences, remembered glances, the tone of a breath taken to sharply near the fire. Over time, this creates a strange mental weight. Nothing is forgotten quickly, because forgetting removes protection. To forget is to risk repeating a mistake publicly, and public mistakes are costly. So people replay old moments quietly while working, while walking, while sitting in the dark. Thought becomes circular, not exploratory. The mind loops gently, like water moving around a stone it has already memorized. Elders are no longer respected only for strength or age, but for how much they remember, for how little they need to react. The most powerful person in the group is often the one who moves the least, speaks the least, and reacts the slowest, because that signals total control over memory. Even joy becomes subdued. Laughter exists, but it is brief, controlled, quickly softened into a smile. Excitement feels childish now, something to outgrow rather than celebrate. Nights stretch longer, filled with quiet reflection rather than storytelling. Stories still exist, but they are repetitions, not inventions. People retell what has already proven safe. Original thought doesn't vanish, it just stays internal, folded neatly away where it cannot cause social friction. This makes life steady, predictable, survivable, and deeply restrained. Humans are no longer reacting to the world in front of them. They are reacting to a layered archive of remembered outcomes. In a strange way, the group becomes smarter and less creative at the same time. Mistakes decrease, but so does experimentation. Progress slows into refinement rather than discovery. Everything works well enough, and well enough becomes the highest goal imaginable. And while no one consciously chooses this path, everyone reinforces it simply by staying quiet, by remembering too much, by trusting memory more than instinct until instinct itself grows faint, waiting patiently for a future moment when silence will no longer be enough. Eventually there comes a point where instinct no longer interrupts thought at all, where the body stops offering sudden impulses and instead waits politely for memory to give permission. And this shift is so gradual that no one notices it happening. People still feel hunger, danger, attraction, curiosity, but these sensations arrive muted, filtered through layers of remembered consequence before they are allowed to surface. A sudden sound no longer causes immediate movement. Heads tilt slowly, eyes scan. Bodies wait to see how others respond first. Even fear has learned patience. This creates a population that appears calm almost all the time, steady in posture, economical in motion, rarely surprised. From the outside, it might look like wisdom. From the inside, it feels like constant calculation, a gentle but endless weighing of invisible outcomes. Children grow up slower emotionally, not because they are less intelligent, but because they learn early that reacting quickly is rarely rewarded. The child who runs towards something new is quietly corrected by looks, not words. The child who waits is praised without praise, included without comment. Over time, instinct learns it is not needed. It steps back. Humans begin to move through life as observers of themselves, watching their own reactions form, and then smoothing them down before anyone else can see. This makes relationships polite but distant. Affection exists, but it is expressed through routine rather than touch. Trust is shown through consistency, not vulnerability. Even grief becomes quieter, stretched over long periods instead of sharp moments. Because sharp moments draw attention, the group remains stable, cooperative, impressively durable. Yet something essential has dimmed. The spark that once pushed humans to explore, to risk, to act before fully understanding, has learned to sit still. Nights are peaceful, days are efficient, lives are predictable. No one feels oppressed, and that is precisely why the change is complete. There is no enemy to resist, no rule to break, no tyrant to overthrow. Just a shared agreement, formed without words, that caution is better than courage, that memory is safer than instinct, and that silence is preferable to expression. Humanity has not lost anything dramatically. It has simply traded immediacy for safety, spontaneity for survival, and in doing so, it has become very good at enduring, while quietly forgetting how to begin again. Over time, waiting stops feeling like a pause between actions and starts feeling like the action itself, as if humans have collectively decided that holding still is a form of participation. People wake and do not immediately rise. They lie quietly, listening, measuring the sounds around them, deciding whether this is a moment for movement or another moment for stillness. Tasks are done carefully, with long gaps between steps, not from laziness but from habit. Every action is preceded by a brief internal check, a silent question asked to memory rather than instinct. Is this safe? Has this worked before? Has anyone ever been judged for doing this too soon? The body learns to wait even when nothing is preventing it from moving. This reshapes time itself. Days feel longer, not because more happens, but because less interrupts them. The absence of sudden motion creates a smooth, unbroken flow that feels calm, but also strangely heavy. Conversations become rare and functional. When words are used, they are practical, trimmed of emotion, delivered without urgency. The most trusted people are not the fastest or strongest, but the ones who never rush, who never interrupt, who seem comfortable letting time stretch without filling it. Children adapt quickly. They learn that patience is not something you practice, but something you become. A child who waits is not seen as obedient, but as mature. A child who acts quickly is not punished, just quietly sidelined until they learn. Waiting becomes identity. People describe others not by what they do, but by how long they can remain still. This creates a society that is incredibly resilient to chaos. Sudden changes struggle to take root because no one responds quickly enough to amplify them. Crises soften before becoming crises, but so do opportunities. Possibility drifts past slowly, unnoticed, because it requires initiative. and initiative now feels impolite. Life continues in a steady, gentle rhythm. People survive, cooperate, endure, and age without dramatic conflict. Yet beneath this calm, something faint persists. A barely perceptible restlessness that appears in dreams, in moments of unexplained sadness. In the quiet discomfort of waiting with no clear reason, humans have mastered stillness, but stillness has quietly become their default. And defaults are hard to question because they feel natural, even when they are not chosen. As waiting settles fully into daily life, something subtle begins to redirect human energy inward. Not outward toward action or exploration, but inward toward thought, reflection, and private mental landscapes that no one else can see or judge. People spend long stretches doing very little physically, yet internally they are busy replaying memories, rehearsing possible futures, adjusting imagined conversations that will likely never happen. The mind becomes a safe place to move quickly, to test reactions, to feel impulses without ever expressing them. This internalization feels comforting at first. It allows people to experience curiosity without risk, anger without consequence, desire without exposure. Over time, inner worlds grow rich and detailed, filled with imagined paths not taken and choices carefully avoided. Humans become excellent at imagining life rather than living it. They know exactly what they would do in countless situations, yet rarely feel compelled to actually do any of it. This creates a strange emotional neutrality. People are not unhappy, but they are not deeply fulfilled either. Satisfaction comes from avoiding mistakes rather than achieving something meaningful. Dreams become vivid, not because life is exciting, but because dreams are the only place where instinct still moves freely. In sleep, people run, shout, choose quickly, feel intensely, and wake with a faint sense of loss they cannot quite name. Social bonds remain stable, but shallow. Everyone understands one another's behavior patterns, yet few truly understand another person's inner life, because inner life is no longer shared. Silence protects it. Over generations, this inward focus subtly reshapes human identity. People no longer define themselves by actions or achievements, but by restraint, by how little disruption they cause, by how seamlessly they blend into the collective rhythm. Creativity survives, but only in private thoughts, scratched symbols, quiet patterns made in dirt and erased before anyone comments. The world remains peaceful, efficient, and carefully balanced, but it grows psychologically dense, filled with unspoken ideas pressing gently against the boundaries of silence. Nothing breaks, nothing explodes. Humanity simply becomes very good at living inside its own head, carrying vast inner lives through calm, orderly days, waiting without urgency, thinking without expression, and slowly drifting further from the instinctive immediacy that once pushed it to speak, move, and change without asking permission first. Eventually, thought stops preparing the body for action, and instead becomes a complete substitute for it. As if the mind quietly decides it can handle everything on its own, without involving muscles, voices, or visible change. People still plan, still imagine outcomes, still evaluate risks and benefits with impressive precision. But the final step, the moment where intention turns into motion, is increasingly delayed until it dissolves. The idea feels resolved simply by being considered. A decision imagined feels almost as satisfying as a decision enacted. This creates a gentle illusion of progress. Internally, people feel busy, engaged, mentally active, yet externally very little shifts. Paths remain worn the same way. Tools are used the same way. Relationships settle into fixed patterns that are never challenged because challenging them would require more than thought. This mental dominance feels efficient and safe. Why act impulsively when you can simulate every possible outcome in your head? Why speak when the conversation can be completed silently without misunderstanding? Why move quickly when nothing urgent is demanding movement? Over time, this turns life into a kind of slow meditation, not chosen deliberately, but arrived at through countless small reinforcements. Children inherit this mindset naturally. They are praised for thinking things through, even when thinking replaces doing entirely. A child who hesitates endlessly is seen as careful. A child who acts decisively is seen as reckless, not wrong, just unnecessarily loud. Emotion adapts to this environment as well. Feelings still occur, but they are processed internally before ever reaching the surface, filtered until only the mildest version is allowed through. Anger becomes irritation. Joy becomes contentment. Excitement becomes quiet interest. Extremes fade, replaced by a narrow emotional range that feels stable and manageable. Life grows smoother, but flatter. People do not suffer dramatically, yet they also rarely feel deeply alive. They exist in a steady psychological middle ground where nothing is too good or too bad to require response. The world continues to function remarkably well under these conditions. Cooperation is easy, conflict is rare, survival rates are high, and yet something intangible is missing, something so subtle that it cannot be named without breaking the very silence that defines the culture. Humans have become thinkers first and movers second, and in doing so they have mastered endurance at the cost of momentum, living in a world where almost everything happens internally and the external world waits patiently unchanged for someone to finally move without fully thinking it through. As this way of living settles into normalcy, control becomes so complete that its cost is no longer obvious. Because nothing feels wrong enough to fix. People wake, work, rest, and sleep within carefully managed emotional boundaries. Rarely startled by their own reactions, rarely surprised by others. This predictability feels comforting, almost luxurious, especially in a world that once demanded constant vigilance. Yet control has a quiet side effect. It slowly erodes urgency. When nothing feels pressing, nothing feels worth pushing for. Ambition softens into preference. Desire turns into mild curiosity. Even hope becomes cautious, framed not as something to chase, but as something to wait and see. People tell themselves that patience is wisdom, and often they are right. But patience without movement becomes inertia, and inertia is difficult to notice from the inside. Days blend together seamlessly. There are fewer mistakes, but also fewer stories. Life is remembered as a general feeling rather than a sequence of moments. Elders speak less about what they did and more about what they avoided. Pride is found in stability, not transformation. Children absorb this without resistance. They grow into adults who feel capable, but rarely compelled. Capable of change, capable of risk, capable of passion, yet always choosing restraint because restraint has never betrayed them. Emotional expression becomes precise and measured. People learn to release just enough feeling to maintain connection without ever losing control. Tears are brief, smiles are small. Anger is redirected inward and dissolved before it can disrupt the surface calm. This creates a culture of emotional self-sufficiency that looks strong, but is quietly isolating. Everyone carries their inner life alone, well organized, carefully contained, rarely shared. The group remains united, cooperative, remarkably stable, yet strangely hollow at its center. Nothing collapses, nothing rebels. There is no dramatic turning point, just a gradual thinning of experience, a gentle narrowing of what it means to be human. Control has solved nearly every problem it was meant to solve, and in doing so, it has also solved away the friction that once created growth. Humanity stands balanced, calm, and enduring, perfectly prepared to survive, and increasingly unsure of what it would mean to truly live. As life continues in this carefully managed balance, humans slowly grow accustomed to never being truly tested, and comfort settles in not as pleasure, but as the absence of strain. A state where nothing asks too much and nothing threatens to fall apart. People become highly skilled at maintaining equilibrium, adjusting their behavior just enough to keep everything smooth, but rarely pushing beyond what is familiar. Challenges still appear, but they are approached cautiously, reduced into manageable pieces, softened until they no longer feel like challenges at all. Risk is not avoided aggressively. It is simply postponed until it fades. Over time, this creates a deep sense of reliability. Everyone knows what to expect from everyone else. Reactions are predictable, routines dependable, emotions regulated. This reliability feels like safety, and in many ways it is. No one fears sudden outbursts or reckless decisions. Trust is built on consistency rather than closeness. But within this comfort, resilience begins to change shape. Instead of adapting through struggle, people adapt through avoidance. They become excellent at preventing discomfort rather than enduring it. Pain is minimized, but so is growth. Without moments that demand courage or force transformation, inner strength becomes theoretical rather than practiced. People believe they could handle chaos if it came, yet they have little experience actually doing so. Life remains gentle, almost padded, like walking on a path where all sharp edges have been carefully worn down. The days pass without crisis, and that becomes the measure of success. Stories of hardship from distant groups or past generations are listened to with calm interest, not empathy, because such intensity feels abstract now. Emotional endurance is replaced by emotional regulation. The goal is no longer to survive difficulty, but to prevent it from rising in the first place. This works remarkably well, until one quiet realization begins to form beneath the surface. Strength that is never used becomes uncertain. Courage that is never required becomes hypothetical. And while no one feels weak, many begin to feel oddly unprepared, as if life has been paused on an easy setting for so long that no one remembers how to respond when ease is no longer guaranteed. The comfort is real, the safety genuine, yet beneath it lies a fragile assumption that the world will always allow such careful control. And that assumption rests entirely on circumstances no one is willing to test. As comfort continues uninterrupted, something even quieter begins to fade. The sense that choices themselves carry meaning beyond maintaining balance. People still choose, of course, but their choices are small, reversible, designed to preserve harmony rather than define direction. Decision-making becomes a maintenance task, like adjusting posture to stay comfortable rather than standing up to go somewhere new. Over time, this changes how people relate to responsibility. When every option leads to roughly the same outcome, responsibility feels lighter, almost optional. Success and failure blur together into acceptable results. People stop asking whether a choice is meaningful and instead ask whether it is disruptive. And disruption remains the only real measure of risk. This creates a culture where neutrality is praised, moderation is idealized, and strong preferences feel vaguely suspicious. Passion becomes something observed in others, perhaps in distant groups or in old stories, but rarely practiced firsthand. Even disagreement is softened into polite variation, carefully expressed and quickly resolved. The idea that a single decision could alter a life path begins to feel unrealistic, almost dramatic. Life feels less like a journey and more like a steady presence, something to inhabit rather than shape. Memory plays a role here too. When the past is remembered primarily for mistakes avoided rather than paths taken, the future loses its pull. People plan just enough to remain stable. Long-term visions feel unnecessary when stability has proven sufficient. Children grow up sensing that adulthood is not about becoming something new, but about maintaining what already works. They feel no pressure, but also no pull. Identity becomes less about who you are and more about how well you fit. This fitting is not enforced harshly. It is encouraged gently, rewarded quietly, reinforced daily. No one feels trapped, yet few feel driven. The world hums along smoothly, efficiently, calmly, and beneath that calm hum lies a subtle emptiness. Not painful, not alarming, just noticeable in rare moments of stillness when someone pauses and wonders, without urgency or distress, whether life was ever meant to feel like more than this. And then gently lets the thought pass, because letting it pass is easier than following it. Anywhere unfamiliar. At this stage, humans have become profoundly skilled observers. And observation quietly replaces action as the primary tool for navigating the world. People notice not just what others do, but how they do it, how they pause, how they breathe. Subtle micro-expressions that speak louder than words ever could. Every gesture, every glance, every hesitation becomes data stored in memory for later use. And over time, this constant mental cataloging shapes behavior more effectively than direct instruction or imposed rules. Children grow up mimicking adults not because they are told, but because they have watched endlessly, noting patterns in posture, tone, and timing. The group functions smoothly not because individuals are disciplined, but because they have learned, almost unconsciously, to anticipate one another. Mistakes are rare, not due to punishment, but because anticipation fills the space before error can occur. This is subtle, almost invisible, and the people themselves often forget that it is happening. They move through life confident in their own competence, unaware that most of it is built on silent rehearsal and observation rather than experimentation. Relationships are steady, predictable, cooperative, and yet deeply impersonal in ways no one notices, because every interaction is calibrated by memory and expectation rather than feeling. Conversations are brief, often polite, rarely urgent, yet they carry all the necessary information. Silence in these exchanges is not awkward, it is functional. A punctuation mark that allows the listener to process, adjust, and prepare. Even gestures of affection are measured. Hugs, smiles, touches are deliberate, calibrated, repeated exactly as expected to convey connection without risking imbalance. Adults teach children by demonstration, correcting only subtly when patterns are miscopied. Storytelling becomes a reinforcement tool, not entertainment. Tales of past successes and failures circulate quietly, lessons folded into them like invisible thread. Over decades, observation grows into instinct. People can anticipate outcomes before they happen, adjusting behavior before a situation has fully emerged. This creates a world that is smooth, efficient, harmonious, and remarkably enduring. But it also narrows experience. Humans are excellent at preventing mistakes, but they are less likely to try something truly new. Curiosity is restrained, not absent. Curiosity survives mostly inside thought rather than action. Life continues steadily, like a river following a channel it has carved long ago, flowing predictably, comfortably, enduringly, with every human gently nudged along by a combination of memory, observation, and the quiet pressure of expectation, until action itself becomes a rare and measured event. Something undertaken only after full consideration and often postponed indefinitely. Because in a world this stable, the simplest move can feel like a disturbance, and avoiding disturbance quietly becomes the most valued skill of all. As humans continue living in these quiet, memory-driven settlements, urgency itself slowly fades from daily life, almost as if it has been carefully edited out of experience. Once, people moved quickly because they had to hunger, predators, conflict, change, but now the rhythms of life are smooth, predictable, and slow enough that rapid action is rarely necessary. Even events that once demanded quick thinking, sudden disputes, minor accidents, whether changes are absorbed without alarm, reactions are delayed, measured, carefully weighed against past experience and remembered patterns, until instinct barely registers. Children grow up watching adults pause endlessly before acting, learning that patience is the safest choice and immediacy the riskiest. Action becomes a thought that often never leaves the mind, and choice is filtered first through memory, then observation, then silence, and only rarely expressed physically. This makes human behavior remarkably consistent, almost machine-like in its reliability, but also subtly diminishes spontaneity. Conversations follow the same predictable patterns day after day. Cooperation is efficient, yet mechanical. Joy, sorrow, and surprise are felt in muted form, faint echoes of the intensity they once carried, replaced by careful observation and internalized judgment. People still dream, still imagine, still experience impulses, But these inner stirrings rarely translate into visible movement. Life flows in wide, slow arcs, punctuated by minimal gestures of communication and subtle signs of approval or disapproval, all mediated by memory and expectation rather than immediate instinct. Nights are long and restful. Fires burn in predictable intervals, and paths are walked without haste, like rivers flowing along deeply worn channels. Even when change arrives from outside, the settlement absorbs it cautiously, measuring and observing before integrating it, as if the world itself must ask permission to alter their routines. This slow, deliberate existence creates a strange paradox. Humans endure almost flawlessly, rarely fail, rarely hurt one another, and rarely experience disaster. Yet in this perfection, a faint emptiness spreads, a quiet sense that life's urgency, which once gave weight to choices, energy to movement, and intensity to feeling, has all but evaporated, leaving a world that is safe, steady, and endlessly predictable, with humans navigating it not with instinct or impulse, but with the careful, unhurried calculation of memory, observation, and the quiet understanding that to act too quickly is almost always unnecessary, and perhaps even undesirable. As life settles into its long, careful rhythm, humans begin to value presence more than action. Not consciously, but instinctively. Being somewhere, being accounted for, being quietly attentive to what others do becomes more important than doing anything yourself. Presence reassures the group that the system continues uninterrupted. The person who lingers near the fire observes the distribution of tasks, notices small deviations in routine, is more respected than the one who moves quickly and unpredictably. Children grow up absorbing this lesson without discussion. They learn that standing still, watching, listening, and remembering is not laziness, it is competence. Movement becomes deliberate and minimal. Only what is required to maintain the visible rhythm of life, while the bulk of effort, thought, and calculation happens invisibly in the mind. Emotional responses, too, are moderated. People feel disappointment or excitement, but these are tempered before being shown. Expressions are carefully controlled, gestures measured, pauses considered, all because the weight of observation is constant. A single misplaced action or overly loud reaction draws attention, subtly shifts perception, and lingers longer in memory than it might seem. Over time, the quiet attention of others becomes the invisible scaffolding holding the settlement together. Every movement is informed by how it will be interpreted, remembered, or absorbed. Even disagreement is expressed as subtle hesitation, a pause, a careful choice of phrasing. Rather than argument, adults model this behavior endlessly, and children mimic it instinctively, so that the system perpetuates itself with minimal enforcement. Life is efficient, steady, and remarkably resilient, but also inwardly constricted. People carry rich internal lives filled with imagined possibilities, hypothetical solutions, and careful reasoning, yet few of these ever manifest externally. Decision-making exists largely as mental rehearsal. Outcomes are rarely tested by action. Nights are calm, extended, filled with quiet reflection and observation. Fires burn predictably, paths are traced with repeated care, and humans sleep knowing that the rhythm will continue uninterrupted. Presence, observation, memory, and subtle calibration have replaced urgency, spontaneity, and instinct. Life continues gently, predictably, and enduringly, and the world outside moves as if in harmony with this quiet, careful human order, with each individual silently rehearsing action, measuring reaction, and allowing presence itself to be the measure of participation. Over the generations, something subtle but profound settles into the human experience. Habit quietly assumes the role of authority. People no longer rely on explicit commands, social enforcement, or spoken instructions because habit itself has become the framework guiding almost every action. From the moment children wake to the moment they sleep, behavior is sculpted by repetition so steady and predictable that it feels natural, inevitable, as if the body knows what to do before the mind even realizes it. Paths through the settlement, tasks performed at dawn, meals taken at exact intervals, gestures exchanged in greetings, all of these become encoded into daily practice. Adults enforce habit not through speech, but by modeling it consistently. If one person deviates, the deviation is noted, remembered, and gently corrected through observation, through the subtle pressure of example, rather than through confrontation. Children internalize this instantly. They do not need to be told. They watch, they mimic, they adjust. Over time, habit becomes a kind of invisible law, more effective than any explicit rule because it is never questioned, rarely resisted, and almost impossible to perceive consciously. Emotional life adapts to support this system. Impulses are tempered, instincts are moderated, and reactions are delayed until they can align with the established rhythm. Excitement, fear, joy, anger, these are all filtered through habitual behavior, emerging only in forms that are socially consistent and memory approved. Decision-making, too, bends to habit. Choices are rarely deliberate. They are predictable extensions of previous patterns. Even novelty is integrated slowly, cautiously, and only after observation confirms that it will not disrupt the carefully balanced system. This creates a population that is remarkably stable, resilient, and enduring. Conflicts are rare because deviation is rare. Productivity is reliable because actions are patterned. Survival rates are high because risk is minimized through foresight, observation, and repetition. Yet beneath this calm, subtle tension exists. Habit is powerful, but it is also inherently constraining, as the weight of repetition accumulates. The space for spontaneity, improvisation, and exploration narrows. Curiosity is internalized. Innovation becomes quiet speculation, and instinct is muted in favor of what has already worked before. Nights remain calm and long. Fires burn in predictable cycles, and the group rests with the assurance that tomorrow will follow the same rhythm, guided entirely by habit. The invisible authority that now governs more effectively than any spoken law or remembered story could, quietly shaping lives from inside, directing them without a word, and teaching all who live within it that continuity itself is the most reliable form of guidance. As habit strengthens, humans develop a profound reliance on anticipation. The subtle skill of predicting what will happen next, not through chance or instinct, but through careful observation of patterns repeated over time. Every sound, every movement, every glance carries information, And over years, this becomes a silent language, understood without speaking. Children grow up learning not just to watch, but to read these signals, to infer intentions, moods, and possible actions before they occur. The act of anticipating becomes itself a survival tool, more precise and reliable than any immediate reaction. Decisions are rarely made spontaneously. Instead, they are rehearsed internally, tested against memory and observation, then executed only when the outcome has already been imagined and deemed safe. Adults reinforce this by modeling patience, careful scanning, and restrained movement. A hurried action feels wrong, even if it is technically correct, because the group's rhythm expects deliberation. Social bonds solidify around shared expectations of how one will act, not around emotions or spoken promises. This creates an environment where reliability is more respected than creativity, subtlety more valued than boldness, and foresight more critical than spontaneity. Emotions are quietly filtered through anticipation as well. Desire is moderated by past consequences, frustration by the observed reactions of others, and joy by the subtle requirement of timing. Even excitement is delayed, calculated to align with the rhythms already established. Nights are spent in stillness, not out of fatigue, but because anticipation carries the mind forward. Tomorrow's movements are already quietly rehearsed while the body rests. Over decades, anticipation merges with habit so seamlessly that action itself becomes nearly invisible. People move exactly when expected, speak only when necessary, react just enough to maintain equilibrium, and rarely disturb the overall flow of the settlement. The system is efficient, resilient, and enduring, yet inwardly constrictive. Humans remain capable, intelligent, and aware. Yet their ability to act outside the anticipated patterns diminishes. Risk, once a natural teacher, is now observed, simulated, and avoided. Opportunity, once a fleeting spark, is measured, rehearsed, and sometimes deferred indefinitely. Life continues in a slow, steady stream, remarkable for its reliability, its quiet harmony, and its endurance, but also remarkable for the way it bends humans entirely toward the logic of expectation, teaching them that survival is safest when anticipation guides every step, every glance, every subtle pause, and every action is quietly weighed against the invisible compass of what is predicted, remembered, and approved by the unspoken order that has grown up around them. Over time, the quiet reliance on habit and anticipation begins to shape not just behavior, but identity itself. People no longer define themselves by desires, ambitions, or passions, but by the patterns they follow, the roles they perform, and the consistency with which they meet expectation. A child grows up not asking who they want to be, but noticing what is needed, what has always been done, and how to do it correctly. Success is measured not by achievement or novelty, but by how reliably one moves within the rhythm of the group. Every gesture, every step, every glance is a subtle affirmation that one belongs, that one fits, that one will continue without disturbing the delicate equilibrium. Over years, this creates humans who are both remarkably capable and quietly constrained. Their skill lies in reading the world, predicting outcomes, and acting with precision. Yet their creativity, spontaneity, and instinctive impulse have all been filtered, shaped, and limited by repetition. Emotional life mirrors this. Joy, anger, curiosity, and affection are present, but only within acceptable bounds. Too much deviation feels uncomfortable. Too much display draws attention. Even private thoughts are moderated unconsciously, rehearsed internally, and measured against long-standing patterns. The group remains harmonious, cooperative, and stable. Disruptions are rare because everyone understands the expectations without being told. Tasks are completed efficiently, disputes are handled subtly before they escalate, and people thrive in this quiet, predictable order. Nights continue to stretch peacefully, fires burn in rhythmic cycles, and humans sleep with confidence that the world will function as it always has, guided by memory, habit, and careful observation. Yet, as identity becomes defined entirely by routine, an undercurrent of subtle limitation grows. Life is safe, life is enduring, life is remarkably stable, but it is also tightly constrained. The richness of immediate experience, the spark of unfiltered impulse, the sudden leap of instinct all have been softened into the background of mental rehearsal. Humans are fully adapted to their environment, masters of the invisible flow of expectation. Observers, thinkers, careful actors in a predictable world, and yet increasingly strangers to the kind of freedom that once made action, risk, and choice feel alive. The settlement thrives quietly, reliably, endlessly, and within that very reliability lies both its greatest strength and its quietest cost. A world without urgency, without surprise, without the raw, unpredictable energy that once defined life outside these carefully measured walls. As generations continue under these rhythms, human experience itself begins to compress in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Life is still long, time still pauses, yet each day begins to feel less like a series of events and more like a single, smooth, continuous stretch of quiet movement. People wake, perform tasks, observe, wait, eat, sleep, and repeat, all within patterns reinforced by habit, anticipation, and memory. The mind becomes an archive, cataloging each repetition with care, noting minor deviations, replaying lessons, and preparing silently for tomorrow's cycles. Sensory life adjusts to this compression. Sounds, movements, and interactions are filtered. The unexpected startles briefly, but does not disturb. Children grow attuned to nuance, learning to detect the smallest shifts in tone, posture, and expression, using these signals to guide their own measured behavior. Emotion flows more slowly too. Anger is diffused before expression. Joy is restrained. Surprise is internalized. Curiosity tempered. The interior world becomes rich, active, and precise, yet external life carries minimal turbulence. Humans navigate existence with quiet expertise, subtle judgment, and careful observation. Rarely acting before calculation, rarely speaking before assessment. Social bonds are strong, cooperative, predictable, but quietly impersonal, because relationships are defined more by shared routines than by impulsive affection or dramatic displays, even rituals feeding, gathering. Observing seasonal markers are performed with almost imperceptible deliberation. confirming the flow of habit without fanfare. Life is comfortable, calm, safe, yet a delicate limitation develops. The compression of experience dulls immediacy, reduces spontaneity, and makes novelty feel marginal. Opportunity is acknowledged, explored internally, and often quietly postponed. Decisions are rehearsed endlessly in the mind before ever reaching movement, sometimes indefinitely. Nights stretch with fires burning predictably, shadows falling in familiar patterns. As humans rest in the certainty of tomorrow's repetition, their bodies are calm, their minds alert yet measured, and the world continues to move in harmony with them. They endure remarkably well, avoid danger, and maintain peace. Yet the very perfection of this rhythm quietly limits the richness of life. The unexpected spark of instinct, the sudden thrill of unplanned action. Humans have adapted to a world of astonishing stability, and within this adaptation lies both profound security and the faintest trace of lost vitality. The life they now inhabit is enduring, harmonious, and safe, yet every day is slightly thinner, slightly quieter, slightly more compressed than the one before, as if existence itself has been folded neatly to fit the careful contours of survival. Over countless cycles of repetition, waiting, and careful action, humans begin to learn through an almost invisible curriculum, one taught not with words, but entirely through observation. Children no longer rely on explicit instruction. Instead, they spend years watching adults, older siblings, and peers, cataloging gestures, pauses, glances, and the rhythm of movement, learning the unspoken rules of survival. They notice who moves first, who hesitates, who interrupts, and who is trusted. Every subtle cue carries meaning, shaping expectations and behavior before anyone ever speaks. This silent education is rigorous, continuous, and deeply effective. Children memorize patterns that guide action, refine social navigation, and encode consequences into instinct. Lessons of caution, timing, and endurance are absorbed more quickly than any formal teaching could impart. Over time, the boundaries between learning and living blur. Observation itself becomes the dominant tool for understanding, predicting, and controlling outcomes. Adults continue this pattern, refining their own awareness of subtle human signals, reinforcing behaviors by consistent modeling rather than instruction, and gently correcting deviations with looks, pauses, or minor gestures. This creates a society of humans who are highly skilled at anticipating each other's actions, reading unspoken intentions, and regulating their own impulses accordingly. Decision-making becomes an exercise in mental rehearsal. People simulate outcomes, compare them against remembered patterns, and act only when the projected result aligns with the quiet order of the group. Even emotional responses are carefully managed, filtered through observation before expression. Joy, sorrow, excitement, and frustration are tempered into measured forms that preserve stability. Nights remain long and still. Fires burn predictably. Shadows shift in expected ways. And humans rest confident that tomorrow will unfold according to the rhythms they have internalized. The system works exceptionally well, maintaining peace, cooperation, and endurance. Yet the curriculum of observation carries its own subtle cost. The richness of unplanned experience is minimized. Spontaneity is rarely exercised. And instinct is increasingly mediated by the silent weight of what has always worked. Humans have become masters of anticipation and subtle action, able to navigate complex social and environmental patterns with extraordinary skill. Yet every step is quietly measured, every word carefully weighed, and every movement rehearsed mentally long before it reaches reality. In this way, life is profoundly stable, deeply safe, and remarkably enduring, and yet, as observation becomes both teacher and ruler, the world grows quieter, slower, and more inwardly contained with each passing generation. As caution becomes second nature, silence gradually asserts itself as the most powerful tool humans possess, not imposed by authority, but learned through centuries of observation and subtle reinforcement. People discover that quietness conveys as much meaning as speech ever could, sometimes more. A pause can signal consent, a slow gesture can indicate agreement, and a careful look can adjust behavior without a word. Children grow up interpreting silence as guidance, modeling it instinctively, understanding that speaking too soon risks error, social friction, or misinterpretation. Adults reinforce this habit by example. They move slowly, speak sparingly, and react with minimal display, allowing silence to carry instruction without coercion. Over time, silence shapes thought as well. People internalize patterns, rehearse decisions mentally, and allow reflection to dominate before action occurs. Expression is measured, emotion filtered, and reaction delayed until it aligns with memory, expectation, and group norms. The settlement functions smoothly, predictably, and efficiently. Tasks are completed, social bonds are maintained, conflict is rare, and survival is maximized all without loud directions, rapid responses, or dramatic gestures. Yet the mastery of silence also reshapes human experience. Impulse fades, spontaneity becomes muted. The world is observed more than it is acted upon. Instinct is quieted, and even imagination adapts, becoming internalized, rehearsed, and restrained. Nights stretch with long, calm hours of sleep. Fires burn in expected cycles, and humans rise knowing that the rhythm of life will continue unbroken. The skill of silence offers safety, stability, and endurance, but it also narrows the immediacy of life. Energy once spent on exploration, sudden decision, or unplanned reaction is now directed inward, into observation, reflection, and anticipation. Action occurs less, thought occurs more, and the world seems to glide past as humans move. Deliberately, carefully, quietly, fully aware of patterns and outcomes, yet increasingly removed from the raw spontaneous vitality that once defined existence outside this meticulously balanced order. The settlement thrives, coherent, steady, enduring, a world of silent mastery, where every breath, glance, and pause is a subtle thread woven into the invisible fabric of human survival. And yet the calm perfection of this order quietly diminishes the thrill of unpredictability, leaving life safe, prolonged, and carefully measured, but ever so slightly less alive in the immediate sense than it once was. Over countless years, instinct, once a fiery and immediate guide, gradually softens into something almost imperceptible, domesticated by observation, habit, and the careful anticipation that now governs daily life. Humans still feel hunger, fear, curiosity, and desire. But these impulses arrive muted, measured, and filtered through layers of memory before any movement occurs. A sudden sound no longer demands instant reaction. A minor risk is considered in multiple mental simulations before action is taken. And even the body waits for confirmation that movement is appropriate. Children grow up learning that acting too quickly is inefficient or disruptive. Restraint is rewarded silently, without ceremony, and impulsiveness quietly diminishes. Adults reinforce this model through subtle cues, demonstrating measured motion, quiet speech, and controlled emotion. Over time, instinct no longer drives life. It merely informs it from the background, a whisper rather than a shout. This creates humans who are extraordinarily patient, attentive, and skilled at long-term observation. They notice slight deviations in behavior, subtle environmental shifts, and minor inconsistencies in routine, adjusting their actions to maintain harmony and predictability. Social life is stable and cooperative, yet interactions are calm, restrained, and deliberate rather than spontaneous or passionate. Emotions exist, but they are internalized, filtered, and calibrated. Joy, sadness, or excitement emerges in tempered doses, enough to maintain humanity, but never enough to disturb the order of things. Decisions are rehearsed mentally again and again. Often, the rehearsal alone is sufficient to satisfy the mind, making movement optional. Life continues in slow, harmonious rhythms. Nights stretching peacefully, fires burning predictably, paths walked without haste. Humans endure, cooperate, and survive efficiently. Yet the domestication of instinct slowly softens the immediacy of experience. Action, risk, and surprise fade into memory and anticipation. Life becomes predictable, smooth, and enduring, but increasingly inward-focused, lived more in the quiet rehearsal of the mind than in the unfiltered reality of immediate sensation. The settlement functions almost flawlessly, a testament to human adaptability. Yet its perfection is measured by the absence of urgency, spontaneity, and unmoderated instinct, leaving a calm, enduring, and deeply observed world where living is steady and reliable, but subtly quieter and more contained than it ever was when instinct still ruled freely. As instinct softens, humans turn almost entirely toward anticipation as the silent architect of behavior. Each movement, gesture, and glance is guided less by immediate need than by the imagined outcome measured against memory and experience. People rehearse actions internally, projecting forward in small mental increments, predicting consequences before a muscle ever shifts. Children learn this instinctively, observing adults who pause, consider, and move with precision. Internalizing the notion that foresight is more valuable than speed. Adults reinforce this with their deliberate conduct. Nothing is rushed, nothing is unplanned, and deviations are absorbed carefully, often corrected by example rather than by confrontation. Over time, anticipation governs nearly every aspect of daily life. Social interactions are measured, conversations are minimal, and the subtle currents of agreement, expectation, and judgment flow invisibly between people. Decisions become mental simulations. Actions often exist first as rehearsed possibilities. The imagined execution almost as satisfying as the real. Emotional life is filtered through anticipation as well. Fear is tempered, desire is moderated, excitement is calculated, and even curiosity is mentally explored before any outward expression occurs. The settlement functions with remarkable stability. Cooperation is implicit, mistakes are rare, and survival is optimized. Yet the dominance of anticipation subtly reshapes human experience. Life feels longer, slower, smoother, yet internally it is dense with rehearsed possibilities that rarely reach actual expression. The body becomes patient, the mind alert but cautious, and the rhythms of days and nights grow predictable and unbroken. Fires burn in regular cycles, paths are traced with care, and humans move almost imperceptibly in harmony with one another. Spontaneity is faint, urgency almost entirely absent, and risk is postponed or avoided altogether. And still, this system is extraordinary in its efficiency, its calm, its enduring strength. The quiet mastery of anticipation allows life to persist with minimal conflict, maximum cohesion, and astonishing longevity. Yet it also contains a subtle, invisible trade-off. Humans are increasingly alive in simulation, in mental rehearsal, and in careful measurement, and less alive in the raw, immediate, unfiltered engagement that once defined existence outside these predictable, silent, and carefully observed cycles. Over time, as anticipation, habit, and observation dominate, impulse the spontaneous, immediate force that once drove movement, exploration, and emotion fades quietly into the background, not eradicated, but domesticated and subdued. People still feel sudden urges, flashes of curiosity, small irritations, or unexpected delight, but these impulses are caught mid-flight, filtered through memory and expectation before they reach expression. Children learn this almost instinctively. They see adults pause, consider, and adjust before acting, and internalize the lesson that unchecked impulses are inefficient, disruptive, or unnecessary. Adults reinforce the pattern subtly, rarely correcting overtly, instead demonstrating patience, measured movement, and quiet reflection as the norm. Over decades, the population evolves into a society where every gesture, glance, and step is premeditated, even when it appears effortless. Emotional life mirrors this transformation. Joy is tempered, excitement is softened, and anger is channeled inward long before it manifests outwardly. Desire is often explored internally rather than acted upon. Human behavior is guided less by raw feeling and more by rehearsal, foresight, and the quiet pressure of maintaining equilibrium. Nights remain calm and long, fires burn predictably, and the world outside this settlement exerts minimal influence. Even risk is largely neutralized. Potential hazards are considered in advance and avoided before they can emerge as problems. Life continues, steady, reliable, and remarkably enduring. People are fully capable, perceptive, and adaptive, yet the raw energy of impulsive action has diminished almost entirely. Spontaneous decisions, sudden movement, and unplanned gestures are rare, filtered through internalized models of correctness, safety, and social expectation. The settlement thrives, harmonious and resilient. Yet existence has become subtle and inward-focused. Humans live in continuous mental rehearsal, in careful calibration, in anticipation and measured restraint, experiencing life with extraordinary awareness and endurance, but gradually losing the immediate, visceral engagement with the world that once made living unpredictable, intense, and urgent. In this quiet perfection, action exists largely as simulation, and life unfolds as a careful, slow, and deliberate navigation of possibilities, with impulse eclipsed by the invisible authority of memory, observation, and anticipation. As impulse fades and anticipation dominates, human life becomes guided by a subtle economy of effort, where every action is weighed not only against its necessity, but against its potential ripple through the carefully maintained social and environmental order. Movement itself is measured, a step is deliberate, a reach is calculated, a gesture is chosen for maximum clarity with minimal expenditure of energy. Children learn this instinctively, growing up absorbing the rhythm of the adults around them, noticing how even the smallest action carries weight in the network of observation, and learning to act only when the mental rehearsal predicts safety and appropriateness. Adults reinforce this by example. They speak little, move slowly, and let the group absorb subtle corrections without confrontation. Over time, effort itself becomes refined into an almost invisible discipline. Tasks that once required energy and attention are now completed smoothly, efficiently, with minimal motion, and mistakes are almost entirely eliminated because every step has already been silently anticipated. Emotional energy follows a similar pattern. Joy is expressed lightly, frustration is delayed or internalized, and desire is moderated, explored internally rather than externally. Social cohesion thrives under this economy of effort. Cooperation is nearly automatic. Misunderstandings are rare, and conflicts are absorbed almost before they manifest. The settlement functions with extraordinary calm, continuity, and endurance. Nights are long and still, fires burn predictably, and humans rest confident that tomorrow's rhythm will unfold as it always has. Yet the very efficiency of this system introduces a quiet limitation. The richness of lived experience is narrowed, subtlety replacing spontaneity, and observation replacing direct engagement. People navigate the world with exceptional skill, foresight, and awareness, but much of their experience exists in the mind, rehearsed and anticipated rather than enacted. Life continues steady, resilient, and harmonious, a testament to the enduring power of human adaptation, but in its perfection. The subtle economy of effort slowly softens the raw intensity of experience. Movement, choice, and emotion are measured and deliberate, so that humans endure, cooperate, and survive with remarkable success, yet increasingly exist as silent, calculating participants in a world that feels safe, predictable, and enduring, but quietly more restrained and inward than the untamed life that existed before habit. Observation and anticipation became the invisible guides of survival. As life continues under the invisible laws of habit, observation, and the carefully measured economy of effort, humans gradually develop what can almost be called a quiet mastery over existence itself. Every individual moves with a precision born not of instruction, but of accumulated experience, internalized patterns, and constant anticipation of what others will do, what the environment will present, and what minor deviations could arise. Children grow up immersed in this mastery, absorbing not just the mechanics of survival, but the subtle art of predicting outcomes. Before they happen, they learn to read faces, gestures, pauses, and micro-expressions with almost instinctive skill, translating observation into calibrated action. Adults maintain this system through deliberate modeling. They speak sparingly, act slowly, and let the weight of example guide behavior, correcting gently through subtle cues rather than overt commands. Over time, anticipation and habit merge so completely that most movement is executed as though it were already rehearsed, almost invisible in its efficiency. Emotional life is similarly disciplined. Joy, frustration, desire, and excitement are present, but always tempered and integrated into the rhythm of the group. Spontaneity, while still possible, is quieted by internalized norms and mental simulations of consequences. The settlement functions with exceptional stability. Tasks are completed reliably, disputes rarely arise, and individuals thrive because the environment has been internalized into their memory, guiding action before problems can even emerge. Nights stretch in calm continuity, fires burn predictably, and the community sleeps knowing tomorrow will unfold with the same harmony as today. Yet even in this remarkable endurance, there is a quiet trade-off. Life becomes inwardly dense, mentally rich, yet externally restrained. Actions are precise, deliberate, and efficient, but rarely impulsive. Emotions are experienced, but filtered. Instinct is present, but domesticated. Humans survive, cooperate, and maintain order with extraordinary reliability. Yet the vibrancy of unfiltered experience is subtly diminished. The mastery of anticipation and habit ensures safety and stability, allowing life to persist seamlessly across generations. But it also transforms living into a continuous rehearsal, a quiet performance measured against memory and expectation, a world where movement, thought, and emotion are increasingly guided by what has been observed and anticipated, rather than by immediate impulse, creating a human existence that is enduring, remarkably capable, and profoundly calm, yet quieter and more contained than life ever was in its original, untamed state. As generations unfold, the settlement reaches a state where observation, anticipation, habit, and careful action together create a quiet permanence, an almost imperceptible architecture of life that governs everything without a single spoken command. Humans move with extraordinary coordination, their gestures, glances, and even pauses synchronized across individuals in ways that feel natural, effortless, and yet entirely learned. Children grow up immersed in this subtle web, learning that survival, cooperation, and social cohesion are maintained not by force, but by watching, remembering, and adjusting. Every subtle movement, every micro-expression, every slight hesitation carries weight and is catalogued internally, shaping future behavior. Adults reinforce these patterns with calm, consistent modeling. They rarely correct directly, speak minimally, and rely on example to guide behavior. Action is often preceded by mental rehearsal so complete that movement sometimes becomes nearly optional. a physical echo of a decision already made in the mind. Emotional life, too, is refined and tempered. Joy, frustration, curiosity, and desire are present, yet filtered through observation and expectation before manifesting outwardly. Impulse is domesticated, spontaneity is moderated, risk is minimized through internalized foresight. Nights stretch long and undisturbed, fires burn predictably, and the group rests in the confidence that tomorrow will proceed. According to the invisible architecture of habit and anticipation, life functions with remarkable resilience, continuity, and calm. Humans endure, cooperate, and thrive with minimal conflict. Their behaviors finely tuned to subtle cues rather than explicit instruction. Yet, beneath this quiet perfection lies a subtle constraint. Life has become inwardly measured, rich in observation, but less so in immediate, raw experience. Choices are rehearsed, impulses are moderated, and even curiosity is mostly explored internally. The settlement persists beautifully, stable across time, a testament to human adaptability and the quiet power of observation, anticipation, and habit. Survival is perfected, harmony is maintained, and life continues almost endlessly in its calm, deliberate flow. The human experience is extraordinary in its endurance, subtlety, and quiet mastery, yet increasingly exists as a careful navigation of patterns and rehearsed outcomes, rather than unfiltered action, leaving a world that is safe, enduring, and profoundly steady, but ever so slightly less vivid in its immediacy than it once was before observation and anticipation became the silent rulers of life. At this point, the story is essentially approaching its final stretch, and the last part, Part 50, can wrap up the reflective, calm, and continuous tone of the entire narrative, bringing closure while maintaining the slow, sleep-inducing rhythm. And now, as we drift gently toward the conclusion of this long, quiet journey, we can take a moment to reflect on what life looked like before cities, before written law, before constant noise, before the rapid pace of what we now call civilization. Humans existed in a world defined not by monuments or rulers, but by patterns, memory, observation, and the subtle, almost invisible forces that guided behavior and preserved life. Every movement was measured, every glance noted, every pause weighed, and every action rehearsed mentally before it unfolded. Children grew up immersed in this rhythm, learning not from instruction, but from the silent, steady teaching of watching, mimicking, and internalizing. Adults guided without speaking, corrected without confronting, and modeled restraint, patience, and subtlety endlessly, so that the group functioned efficiently and harmoniously without words. Emotion was present, but tempered. Instinct was acknowledged, but filtered. Curiosity existed, but mostly explored internally. Life flowed slowly, safely, and predictably. Yet the mind remained alert, cataloging, rehearsing, and anticipating. Nights were long, fires burned reliably, and humans slept knowing that tomorrow's patterns would unfold as they had for generations. A continuity crafted not through authority or violence, but through memory, observation, and quiet cooperation. This rhythm created a world of endurance, subtle mastery, and astonishing reliability. A life where survival was maximized, mistakes were rare, and the network of human interaction functioned as if orchestrated by an invisible hand. And yet, in this perfection, something essential shifted: the immediacy of experience. The sudden spark of instinct, the unplanned thrill of action all softened, muted, folded into rehearsal and anticipation. Life was lived steadily, internally rich, outwardly measured, harmonious, and enduring, but increasingly filtered through mental simulation rather than raw experience. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson of this era, that humans are capable of remarkable adaptation, creating resilience, cooperation, and continuity through the simplest, subtlest tools: watching, remembering, anticipating, and in doing so, they invented a world where life persists calmly, methodically, and beautifully, a testament to the invisible mastery of the mind over circumstance. So tonight, as you let your thoughts settle and your eyes grow heavy, imagine the slow, deliberate flow of these early humans, moving through their world with careful attention, quiet skill, and patient observation, surviving, enduring, and quietly thriving in a rhythm so steady that it became life itself, a rhythm that teaches us, perhaps, that there is as much wisdom in waiting and watching as there ever was in action, and that sometimes the quietest mastery is the most enduring of all.
Today we will talk about a very old history topic. This story is from a time when there were no house, no cities, no schools and no books. This is the story of fire. Fire is not just a thing but that burns. Fire changed everything. Fire made human different from animals. Without fire there would be no food like today, no protection, no progress, and maybe no modern world. This is the story of how fire slowly changed human life step by step. Long, long ago, humans were very weak. They had no clothes, no proper homes, and no weapons. They lived in forest and open land. They were always afraid. Big animals hunted them, cold weather hot there, dark nights scared them. Human ate raw food. Raw meat was hard to chew. Raw plants were bitter and dangerous. People got sick easily. Many people died young. Life was very hard. The first time humans saw fire. Yes, fire was not first made by human. Fire came from nature. Lighting heat trees, volcanoes burned land, dry forest caught fire. Early humans saw fire from far away. They saw bright light. They felt heat. At first, they were scared. Fire was dangerous. Fire burned skin. Fire destroyed trees. But humans are curious. They watched fire carefully. Slowly, humans understood something important. Fire is dangerous, but fire is also useful. Fire give heat, fire give light. People start keeping fire interested of running away. They carried burning wood from natural fire. They portrayed that fire carefully. If fire dead, life became hard again. Fire became like a friend. Fire and warmth. Cold weather was deadly before fire. Winter killed many people. People slept at night. Fire changed this. Fire kept human warmth and people could live in a colder place. They could travel to new lands. Fire helped humans survive winter. This was a very big change in history. Fire and light. Before fire, night was very dark. Darkness brought fear. Wild animal hunted at night. Fire brought light. People could see at night. They could stay together. They could talk and think. This helped humans before social. This helped humans share idea. Fire created community. Fire and protection. Fire scared wild animal. Animal were afraid of flame. They stayed away from fire. Humans used fire as protection. They slept near fire. This saved many lives. Fire became a side. Fire and cooked food. This was one of the biggest change in human history. Yes, human learned to cook food. Cooked meat was soft. Cooked plant were safe. People became stronger. Their brains grew bigger. Good food gave more energy. Scientists believe cooking helped human become intelligent. Fire helped create the human brain. Fire and tools. Fire helped humans make tools. They hardened wood in fire. They shaped stone using heat. Later, fire helped me melt metal. This lead to copper tools. They bronze tools. They iron tools. Fire started technology. Fire and caves. Human lived in caves. Caves were dark and cold. Fire made caves livable. Fire kept animal away. Fire gave light inside cave. Human painted on cave walls using firelight. This was early art. This was early culture. Fire and social life. Fire brought people together. People sat around fire. They talked. They shared stories. This was the beginning of language. This was the beginning of tradition. Fire created human society. Learn to make fire. At first human protected natural fire. Later they learned to make fire. They rubbed stones, they rubbed wood. This was a huge discover. Now fire was always available. Human we are no longer dependent on nature. This was the freedom. Fire and migration. Fire allowed humans to move. They went to good lands. They crossed mountains. Fire helped humans to spread across the world, from Africa to Asia, from Asia to Europe, from Europe to everywhere. Fire helped humans conquering that plant. Fire and religion. Fire became scared. People believe fire was a magic. People worshipped fire. Yes, many religions used fire rituals started. Fire became a symbol of life. Fire and farming. Fire helped clear forest. People burned land. This made farming possible. Yes, farming changed human life. People settled down. Villages formed and cities we are born. Are you know? Fast start civilization. Fire and industry. Thousands of years later, fire powered machine, fire boiled water, steam and gas were born. Factors started, trains moved, fire became energy. Fire and modern world. Today, fire still help us. Electric comes from fire. Cooking or users use fire. Industries uses fire, and fire still saves human life. Conclusion: fire is not just that the fire is the history. Fire made humans human. Without fire, there would be no civilization, no cities, no technology. Fast is the greatest discovery in a human history. This, thank you. Today, now this is a very interesting story. I am feeling mm, very relaxed now, because I am try to very best now to please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you.